Story 1. It would blow my mind to see that in front of my home. I have only seen legal drug deals. Story 2. I couldn't care less about a drug deal, but unfortunately the empty lot next to my old house became the spot for deals, and more than one shootout occurred there. I called the police about that. A bullet went through my basement window. Story 3. Assume they are going to get caught very quickly and not worry too much about it. If I can tell with certainty from my window that what is happening across the street is a drug deal, they are not very good drug dealers. Story 4. My neighbor 2 doors down saw a drug deal, called the police, and they arrested those involved. Soon after, several of them were released on bail and returned to her house, setting it on fire. She now lives with her daughter in another state. The men received sentences of 18 months each in the county jail. Story 5. I did not see anything but the stimulation of the United States economy and that unique American entrepreneurial spirit hard at work. Story 6. Start a competing drug stand right next to them and undercut the guy by $1. Story 7. It has happened. I stood at the front door and said, "Okay, bud, move along. I don't give a shit what you're doing. Just don't do it in front of my house." They moved along. I was only kind of surprised that it went so well. It was a rougher neighborhood then, and they were probably glad I didn't sick my dog on them or come out with a baseball bat. They even said sorry. Canadian addicts, eh? Story 8. I used to see it every day in my old neighborhood, but I did not care and did not say anything. One day I came home to a police barricade and a body bag in the street just in front of my apartment. A 16-year-old had been shot during a deal that went bad. That was terrible, but it was not my business. Story 9. Probably nothing. With my luck, they were just doing a Craigslist trade, and now I'm the paranoid neighbor who called the police. No thanks. Story 10. I think I would be more confused if I saw a legal drug deal going on outside my house. Story 11. I lived in a rough part of town for about 12 years. I saw multiple times and in no particular order drug deals, armed robberies, property theft, prostitution, celebratory gunfire, other gunfire, and domestic violence. Then I would go to work 6 blocks away in the emergency room of the busiest level 1 trauma center in the state to treat both the winners and the losers. It made for some intense times. Story 12. At one job, there was a soda machine next to a liquor store. When my girlfriend visited one day, she walked over to get a Coke. A drug deal was taking place in front of the machine. The dealers gave her a what the heck look. She said, "I'm only getting a Coke. Do you realize everyone can see you?" She shook her head, bought a Coke, and returned. Problem solved. No more drug deals in front of the soda machine. Story 13. Same thing I did last night when I saw a homeless man stealing food at Walmart. I didn't see anything. Story 14. I live in a nice part of a city and have literally seen people smoking crack. I really can't be bothered with this. The police are not going to rush to a location for a drug deal. Story 15. I am not the most street-smart person, so I would probably wonder why these people spent so much time repeatedly shaking hands and are now walking away from each other. Story 16. I called the police in this situation. I do not usually mind drug dealing and have ignored it at previous addresses, but this street is full of young families. Children do not need to see that. Story 17. My contacts were all blurry, so I didn't see a goddamn thing. Story 18. My neighbors in Northern California had a methamphetamine lab in their house. You could smell it. People went there at all hours, took small plastic bags, sat against my door, and smoked it. One day, a line of cars was in the alley between our houses. A man came out and went from window to window handing out small plastic bags in exchange for cash. I called the police and described what was happening. They said, "Oh, so they're just hanging out." Story 19. How about behind my home? Or somewhere between the police station and the airport? I ignore them. What else should I do? Get mixed up in someone else's trouble? Story 20. Close the curtains. I did not see anything unless it is clear minors are involved. Story 21. Bold of you to assume that does not already occur on a regular basis. Story 22. You are assuming I would even notice it was happening. Story 23. Mind my fucking business and close my curtains, you damn snoop. Story 24. I would just watch the drug deal and give these strangers some background stories. Story 25. Mind my own business. The police won't get there in time to stop it. I also want to stay alive. Story 26. I would mind my own goddamn business and go back to whatever I was doing. I've seen police brutality happen outside my house before. The man was yelling for help, and 2 police officers were beating him. What do you do then? Who is going to help? Story 27. It happens across the street from us almost nightly. We ignore it. Years ago, the house was raided by the police. They removed many plants. The police have been in and out of the house several times since. I assume the man is on their radar and is either selling prescription medication for cash or something else. Story 28. There is a 50% chance I am involved in the deal. Either way, it never happened. Story 29. The ice cream man is always lurking in my neighborhood on weekdays when school is in session. Story 30. I moved to my current home 7 years ago. Back then, my neighbors did not see anything. You think it cannot happen here, but it can. First gradually and then suddenly. Before you know it, you are picking up needles and human waste, losing sleep because car stereos play all night, witnessing overdoses, getting caught up in gunfire, and having anything that is not locked or bolted down stolen. 4 years later, things are finally recovering, and I am completely willing to move along the next would-be user or dealer who comes to my door. I know where this leads, and preventing that is a risk I am willing to take. Story 31. I am not getting involved today. No thanks. Story 32. Nothing. I live in a high-crime area. We are extremely low-key and want to keep it that way. It would be obvious that we called, and I do not want that kind of attention. I'm saving to move away from here. Story 33. I would ask the dealer if they had any acid because my friend group is hurting for a guy. Story 34. When I was in my early 20s, I lived in a very sketchy neighborhood. I saw many drug deals. At first I was scared, but later I babysat the local dealer's daughter. I had no idea he was a dealer. I only knew the mother. I did not realize the connection until years later, when I worked for the county as a translator and saw him again. He said thank you for watching his daughter for 2 years and that he had my back. All this to say, no, it was not good and it was scary, but sometimes the world is strange. Just have a dead wolf and a camera. Story 35. I try to figure out how I dissociated in the middle of a drug deal. Story 36. Are you the drug abuse resistance education instructor who they mentioned was coming today? Story 37. I'm blind, Your Honor. I can neither confirm nor deny seeing anything. Story 38. I've seen plenty. You mind your business. Snitches get stitches. Story 39. Call the police and report it anonymously. Edit. Criminals are downvoting my comment. Story 40. I cannot even see you, sir. Story 41. Kindly direct them to the pharmacy, which is about 50 meters away, so they can make legal medication purchases. Story 42. It all depends on your situation. Maybe you should just mind your business. Story 43. Mind your business. That's all. Story 44. Mind my own goddamn business. Any other response is wrong. Story 45. When you work in the neighborhood, you learn to mind your own business and say you did not see anything. Treat them a little nicer and often they will protect you. Story 46. My neighbor started calling me a drug dealer and called the police when my friend pulled into my driveway and I handed his wallet back to him. Mind your own business, people. Story 47. This happened to me when I lived in a cheap apartment. I kept my head down and drove past without acknowledging it. There is no need for me to play cop. It honestly did not bother me as long as my home was left alone. Story 48. I would install several clearly visible security cameras and a floodlight. Story 49. I was visiting a friend years ago in Houston. He looked out his window and said he would be right back. He picked up an Armalite rifle Model 15 from his hall closet and went outside to chase drug dealers off his property. It was then I realized my friend did not live in a posh neighborhood. Story 50. Everybody be cool. This is a robbery. Any of you fucking pricks move and I'll execute every last one of you. Story 51. Sorry, I can't help with content that sexualizes minors. You can say, tell them their behavior could put them at risk and ask them to be more careful. Story 52. Years ago I did. I walked by while one of my neighbors got into a car for a minute or two and then got out. I gave him a wink and a smile. Later we laughed about it and he offered me some, but I declined. Story 53. I live in the country, so I would say, you all, get off my land. Story 54. Nothing. It is not my problem, and I will not make it one. The police will not do anything anyway. Story 55. I used to live in New Orleans. I saw drug deals happen on my front steps every day. I didn't say or do anything. They knew I was okay with it and wouldn't speak up. In exchange, they made sure no one in the neighborhood messed with the goofy-looking white boy. A win-win in my book. Story 56. It depends on who they are selling to. If it is an adult, it is nothing. If it is a child, I am recording that on my phone and contacting the police. Story 57. I live in a trailer park, so it would not be unexpected. I would have no reason to do anything unless someone were shot. Story 58. Not a damn thing except maybe keep an eye on it to make sure they leave afterward. Story 59. I didn't know anything the first 3 times. After that, I'm gonna ask the guy what he's selling, and if it's hard stuff, ask him to do it down the block. Story 60. I wonder what the hell they're doing on my side street. Other than that, I would not give a fuck. Story 61. I am thinking nothing. Sucks, I know, but I think I would do nothing. Story 62. Mind my business. I am not a police officer. It is not my job to enforce the law. Story 63. An old world buddy of mine is a fan of the original machete method, where he uses an intimidation check that works most of the time. Story 64. As I do every single day, I see it happening. I look away and do nothing. Story 65. I will probably ignore them unless I have to go out. In that case, I will tell them to find another corner. Story 66. Nothing. I do not want armed gang members showing up at my house. Story 67. I think it's pretty interesting, and maybe now I know who to buy drugs from if I wanted any, but I wouldn't care enough to do anything about it. Story 68. Please ignore it. Street-level drug dealing is difficult to charge and prosecute. Story 69. At my first apartment, someone dropped me off after work. They turned to me and said, I've picked up some weed here once. And I thought, gee, thanks. I'll never forget it. Honestly, I minded my own business. I didn't see or hear anything. Story 70. I grew up in an area with frequent police raids, a drug-related drive-by shooting, and needles left in our front garden, so I mind my own business. Story 71. I saw a man do a drop on a public bus one early morning. I minded my own damn business. Story 72. Shut the fuck up and move on. I do not know what kind of trouble could happen if I intervene. Story 73. Nothing wrong with that in and of itself, but if they seem to be selling to young children or I start seeing people using drugs sniffing around my property, I will have to speak with the dealers. Story 74. Dude. I said come in. Are you dumb? I'm also curious about those legal drug deals you're implying. Story 75. Leave people alone. It is none of my business, and it is not yours either. Story 76. I didn't see shit. Anybody who spends their time witnessing shit is going to get got. Story 77. Unless they are on my property or selling to children, I do not care. If that is how people want to kill themselves, have at it. Story 78. I live in a nice neighborhood. I tell them to take that behavior to the bus depot, where it is more acceptable and there are more people. Story 79. It might be a legal drug deal. You would have to check their permit first. Story 80. My home. Nothing. They know where I live. Some random place. I'll call it in. Story 81. I continue with my day as normal. As long as no one is setting my yard on fire, I couldn't care less. Story 82. Tell us you have lived a sheltered life without telling us. Privileged ass. Story 83 Howl. I live miles outside the small town we claim to be part of. If you're coming out to the woods to do shady things, be ready for the consequences. Story 84 What kind of drugs are we talking about? I do not need people using crack congregating in my yard, but I would not mind having a nearby supply of Molly and hallucinogens. Story 85. I do not mind as long as the dog is leashed. Story 86. I would avoid them because there is zero accountability for police officers. Story 87. This happens frequently in front of my house. Police will not get here. There is not much you can do. Story 88. Someone sold drugs from a first-floor bedroom window in the apartment building where I lived. An elderly woman driving an old Cadillac dropped the goods off. I noticed a man who looked like a biker hanging around more and more. One night I fell asleep on the couch and heard a very loud bang that frightened me. I looked out the window and there were many police cars outside. They were knocking down the metal door to arrest my neighbors. The man who looked like a biker was handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car. The residents were taken away. Later the man was released, his handcuffs removed, and he walked to a car and drove off. What did I do? Nothing, since they were not bothering me. There was a lot worse going on in that complex than the dealer. Story 89. I do not peek at my neighbors. Deal the drugs you want, just not to my family. Story 90. This used to happen in front of the Domino's I worked at many years ago, always the same little guy. A few of us would mark them on a small tally chart next to the printed complaints. We would all spell check incorrect, and guess how much money he made that week. Story 91. Nothing, as long as they are not hanging out on my lawn. I might want to let them know to be a little more discreet if I can see them so easily. Story 92. As long as it was peaceful, I would mind my own business. Story 93. It used to happen all the time at my former home. I kept my mouth shut. It was not my business if it did not affect me. Story 94. It depends. If it is a one-time occurrence that does not affect me, I ignore it. If it does affect me, I take reasonable action. For example, if they are standing in my garden, I ask them politely to stay on the sidewalk because I do not want my plants ruined. Or I ask them not to lean against my car because they might scratch it. It is not about the drugs. I would do the same regardless of why the people are there. If it is a regular, obvious problem, I call the police. I live across the street from a school, and children should not be exposed to that. If I did not live by the school, I would not do anything as long as nothing is being harmed. Basically, I do not care as long as they are not hurting me or anyone else. Story 95. Mind my own business. It's a rough area, and local police are complicit in covering it up. Story 96. Call the police, and be aware of your city's bail policies. Officers may return a few hours later to ask pointed questions. Story 97. This used to happen at our old house, but once the friendly cannabis growers across the street moved, it stopped. I do not remember if we did anything about it. I am pretty sure it was just homegrown cannabis before legalization, so we were not too concerned. Story 98. It's probably me doing it or selling it to my neighbors, so that's the norm. Story 99. I will tell you what my neighbor did. They cursed me out and called the police. Story 100. I called the police. I noticed it happening in front of my house and did not want that to become a regular spot for that activity. I told the dispatcher it was new to the area. Officers arrived within 2 minutes. They jumped out of the patrol car so quickly that I laughed. Story 101. If the dealer is smart and quiet, I do not care. The state-supported rental house across from me has had a few different dealers working out of it. But some men aged 25 to 30 in my town get Tony Montana syndrome when they start making good money. They begin attracting a lot of attention and acting like knuckleheads. After the shootout in front of my house, I installed visible cameras. Story 102. Shake a broom and yell scram, you kids, no matter who they are. Story 103. I once lived across the alley from a drug house. The landlord rented to dealers because they always paid the rent, and it was drive-through drug sales 7 days a week. I did not mind when they were quiet, but one group started whooping and hollering from 11 p.m. to 2 a.m. By the time they quieted down, I was too pissed off to get back to sleep. I kept reporting them until they were forced to move out. The next group was quieter. I mind my own damn business until it starts to negatively impact my life. Story 104. When I shared an apartment wall with a man who was openly cooking and selling crack, with strung-out sex workers passed out in the hallway outside his door and two large, intimidating men knocking on my door at 1 a.m. looking for Jack, I did not see a goddamn thing. Jack was good with drugs and bad with money. He was always friendly and handed out random coupons to everyone on the floor. He had a gambling problem and would sometimes disappear for days, only to be spotted at Dunkin' Donuts across town. I did not see him there. Story 105. Ask for a cut or free drugs if they want to keep using my home as a place of business. Story 106. It happened all the time. I minded my own business because I was a kid and did not know for sure what was happening until they were actually caught. Story 107. My neighborhood in Canada has 4 weed shops within a 5-minute walk from my front door. Weed dealers are a quaint relic of a bygone era. If someone were selling meth or heroin, I would let them go about their business as long as they did not cause a ruckus or stab anyone. My biggest regret is that the magic mushroom shop that opened a storefront last summer in our shopping area was shut down after 3 or 4 days in business. Mushrooms are fantastic, but they are not yet legal here. Story 108. I live in the middle of nowhere, so I would be genuinely confused about how they even found my house and why they could not have done this anywhere else. Story 109. I pop my head out and ask if they are selling marijuana. If they are not, it's not my business. Carry on. If they are, let me see it. Story 110. It is probably me. Weed is legal, but selling it without a permit is not, so I would do nothing. Story 111. When I was working nights, I would visit my grandparents' house after my shift. My grandfather was a night owl, and I started noticing the road beside his house was becoming a spot for drug use and dealing. You accept what you tolerate, and I did not want that near them. So around 2 a.m., they noticed a 190-pound, 6'2" man, dressed all in black and wearing a plate carrier, slowly walking toward them with my Galil ace pointed at the car. The car drove away 5 seconds after they noticed me. I have not seen anyone back there since. I remotely accessed the closed-circuit television system I installed for my grandparents from time to time, and I have not seen anything unusual since. I used to associate with the wrong people while growing up, and I have seen what can happen to bystanders when things go sideways. Shootouts, stray bullets, and the like. People often do not consider that if they allow that activity near their home and stop paying attention, they become easy targets for robberies. Story 112. I would be very surprised if someone were buying drugs beside the cornfield across the road. I would then go back to minding my own business. Story 113. I had a drug dealer living across from me. I did my best to make it look as though I was blissfully unaware. Story 114. Find a new place to live. If I am living somewhere where drug deals are happening openly, especially in front of my house, I do not want to be there when trouble starts. Story 115. It happens every single day. Sometimes it is my ex-partner. There is nothing I can do. It is basically legal here. Story 116. Report it to the police anonymously. Fuck those fuckers. Story 117. When I lived in a real city, nothing happened. Now that I live in flyover country, I tell people to be less obvious and to go back inside. Story 118. Go out and politely ask them to move somewhere else. I would only ask once. I grew up on the streets and have seen and done things that would make most men cry in a corner, sucking their thumb. I left that life behind me, and it is not going to happen here. If they do not move on, they will see life differently from then on. Story 119. I would support my local entrepreneur by either purchasing his wares or keeping my mouth shut. Story 120. I would be confused about why this is happening so far from here and why it remains in front of my home. I would assume it must be significant enough to warrant driving out here, so I would call the police. Story 121. Growing up, I realized the people across the street sold drugs because people came and went all day and only stayed for maybe 5 minutes at most. One time, a man pulled in front of my house while I was playing and asked where so-and-so lived. I did not recognize the name and replied, If you are looking for drugs, they are right across the street. He made a U-turn at the end of my road, went across the street, and then said thank you as he drove away. I laughed. I did not mind it, to be honest. Story 122. This is like asking what you would do if you saw a squirrel in front of your home. Nothing. Nobody cares. Most people have seen a drug deal in front of their residence at some point. If you live in a city or you lived on campus or in student housing, you have seen it hundreds of times. You do not do anything because why would you care? What a silly question. Story 123. I live on a cul-de-sac. That would be weird as fuck. But whatever. I am no snitch. Story 124. I would be shocked, honestly. I live in a very nice neighborhood where everyone conducts their drug deals indoors. Story 125. Keep my mouth shut or invite them inside. Maybe tell them they need to get an ice cream truck. I'll come out there with my money. Story 126. Nothing because the police were buying drugs. I fucking hate living in Georgia. Story 127. There was a drug deal taking place at the entrance to my alley. I was having severe stomach problems, so I did the only reasonable thing. I rolled down the window and shouted, "Get out of the way. I have to defecate." They laughed loudly and moved aside. Story 128. I would be very confused about how they chose my dead-end road with 10 houses. Half my neighbors are retired and will not hesitate to take photos or videos of any unfamiliar vehicle or people in the area and post them on the neighborhood Facebook page. It is also minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit here, which usually keeps riffraff at home. Story 129. I would think, this is an ordinary day, and continue with life. Story 130. I live in a rough neighborhood, so minding my own business is the only option. Story 131. Imagine a raging cartel war in front of your house. Story 132. Oh, I see it all the time. At this point, it is a normal occurrence. Story 133. I'd know it's Monday evening again, somewhere between 9 and 10 o'clock. Every time. You're not being sly, bike boy. Story 134. I tell them to take it to the alley like everyone else. Geez. Story 135. This happened to me. Someone was renting the house a few houses down. It was a party house. Sometimes on our Ring camera I would see a nervous-looking white woman get into a car parked outside our house, and a few minutes later she would get out and the car would drive back down the street. I don't know, nobody seemed dangerous, and I felt that if I confronted the situation it could become dangerous. So, besides laughing about it with my boyfriend, we just left it alone. They moved out last year and now a nice family rents that house, so it is all good. Story 136. All jokes aside, mind your own business. There is really nothing you can do, especially after the fact. If it happens more frequently or serious harm occurs, consider reporting it, but otherwise reporting it is unlikely to help. Story 137. I would mind my own business, probably. What does it have to do with me? Story 138. My neighbor has a 22-year-old daughter who does this regularly. If they would just be quiet, I would not mind. It is the party from midnight to 5 in the morning, taking place 20 feet from my bedroom, that bothers me. Story 139. It is clear that the majority of the commenters here have never lived in an area taken over by drug dealers and do not understand the destruction that open-air drug markets cause. Yes, the drug dealing in front of your house is your business, because it would only be a matter of time before needles are left in your yards and alleys where your children play, bullets go through your windows, and drug dealers chase your friends off the block unless they are buying something. Story 140. If I saw an illegal drug deal happening outside my house, I would not have seen it. Story 141. I would go to the few neighbors nearby and let them know I saw some strangers dealing in the area. I do not think the sheriff who lives at the top of the hill would want that occurring where he lives. Story 142. My father grew tired of people cutting a section out of his front garden hose to make bongs, so he left a small stack of pre-cut sections for them to use. Story 143. If I do not have a current supplier, ask them to connect me with one. If I am already covered for the foreseeable future, please do not contact me. Story 144. Check the price and quality. My neighborhood maintains certain standards. Story 145. I went out and yelled at them to move along. I live in an area with many people experiencing homelessness, but 5 men met on the sidewalk right outside my gate and began selling and lighting up. It was daytime in midsummer, so I had the sliding glass door open for fresh air. The air smelled of skunk. Thankfully, they moved on. Story 146. Demand my cut. They are going to pay a fee for working on my corner. Story 147. I would probably tell my husband, and then we would go back to whatever we were doing. It is not our business what people are getting up to out there, but it is fun to watch sometimes. Story 148. Be very surprised that they came to my upper-middle-class suburban cul-de-sac to sell drugs. Story 149. I have seen several. My wife and I called it ghetto dinner theater when we lived in a rundown neighborhood. Watch, break out some cocktails and dinner, and move on with my life after I have made sure the officer is not beating my neighbors. Story 150. Nothing, but I would get floodlights and cameras. Make your home a less attractive target. Story 151. Sometime in the 1990s, I rented a crummy house across the street from another crummy house. The man in the other house literally sold drugs from his trash can at the curb. On several occasions, I watched a car pull up, open the lid, and drive away. The man would come out, walk down the path with his hands in his pockets, take something from the trash can, replace it with something from his pocket, and go back inside. Soon after, the car would return, open the lid, and drive away. It was pretty comical. Story 152. I live across the street from the county sheriff. I would love it. It's time for a moron to go to jail. Story 153. Call the police. Tell them I saw the neighbor involved in a drug deal in front of my house. As we were talking, he walked back to his house. Please come get him. Story 154. I do not think the police should be called to arrest someone who just bought a joint on a street corner. If a cartel has pulled up in front of my house with an 18-wheeler full of crack cocaine and methamphetamine, that is different. If it is a dump truck full of cannabis, I will get in line. Story 155. It would be kind of strange. I live in a very rural area, so I would wonder who would go to this place to conduct a drug deal rather than walk 50 yards into the forest. That aside, I might just join in and offer my own drugs for sale as well. Profit is profit. Story 156. Was it in my yard? If it's in the street, I would mind my own goddamn business. Story 157. Not a damn thing. Maybe just watch some TV or doom scroll, as long as it doesn't involve being murdered. Story 158. It is none of my business. I would only care if they were being disruptive to the neighborhood. Story 159. It's all right if it's mixed with chili powder and is sold by Captain Cook. Story 160. Normally I would ignore it, but lately there has been a drive-through operation occurring near my business. I do not like the appearance of a constant flow of people I perceive as riffraff when clients come to work with me. I plan to ignore it more and hope the situation resolves itself naturally, as they are not being subtle about what they are doing, but it is unfortunate. Story 161. I live downtown. I do not know what happened. I was playing Pokemon Go. Story 162. I mind my own business unless someone is selling psychedelics. In that case, I ask if they accept Venmo. Realistically, I would never know what they are peddling, so I would just go about my day as normal. Story 163. I would know that I am in Canada and quickly leave to return to my new country. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.